I'm really excited to introduce this stellar group of speakers. Michelle Gadsden-Williams, who's Managing Director and Global Head of Diversity, Equity and Inclusion at BlackRock, Julie Turpin, Chief People Officer at Brown & Brown, and Sandra Rang, Chief Diversity and Talent Strategy Officer at Shearman and Sterling. We're going to be talking about how 2020 impacted diversity, equality and inclusion in the workplace and where we go from here, which I think is a great topic to end on. We'll also focus on actions as well. So welcome everyone.
Juliet.
Thanks for having us.
Hello, thank you.
Hi, thank you for being here, and I hope you managed to catch some of the conversations today. Let's start, Michelle, I'd like to start with you. You've had so much experience, more than 25 years of experience as an advocate for equality within corporate America, and I think BlackRock are really trailblazing the way when it comes to thinking about intersectional equity and diversity and inclusion. So if you could, a brief introduction on you and your background, but also how have you seen DE&I efforts shift in the wake of 2020?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here amongst these esteemed panelists. A little bit about my background. So I'm a lifer in this work of diversity practice. I've been doing it for a little over 30 years, quite honestly, in a number of different organizations and industries around the world. I've led DEI in the pharma industry, consumer goods, professional services. I owned my own consultancy practice here in New York City for a little bit. Went to Accenture, and now I'm back in financial services. So this is a full circle moment for me. And I've also led diversity practice for 2/3 of my career outside of the United States. So I've seen it living in the US as well as living in Switzerland, Turkey, and Hong Kong. So to answer your question, the incidents of last year was really the inflection point for a lot of us who do this work for a living. It made things abundantly clear, in my view, that bias, conscious or unconscious, disproportionately impacts people of color, full stop. And so there's finally an acknowledgement that these biases also exist in our workplaces. So we're now naming it and calling it what it is. Microaggressions or discrimination, bias, whatever terminology you want to use, we're now starting to talk about it. And these societal injustices have really changed the paradigm, in my view, in terms of the way that we work. And it's really significantly altered the discourse of race and social justice in the workplace. There are macro forces, as I call it, that are informing our approach to this work. Employees are asking about it and holding leaders accountable to it. Our board members are asking, clients and regulators are also asking about it and inquiring about it. So the stakes have gone up for a lot of us. And as a result, the commitment to DEI has become even more critical for most companies, if not all companies. I was listening to the previous panel, and B. Dixon mentioned something that I thought was incredibly pivotal. The role of the Chief Diversity Officer has also become a lot more prominent in the past, I'd say, couple of years, but this past year in particular. It's become one of the most frequently searched roles by executive search firms in the past year. So many companies have pledged billions of dollars of their internal and external programming and initiatives in support of social justice. Internal communications have increased on the topic. There are a lot more listening sessions and opportunities for employees to share their lived experiences. So there's a lot going on. And we've also evolved from what was to now what I'm calling diversity 2.0. And we've integrated the E into our work, which also symbolizes our evolution and our maturity in this space. That we're not just focusing on the D, diversity, which is all the ways that we differ, or the I, which really speaks to the environment that we're trying to create. But equity is, in my view, the most important factor in the equation, where most organizations are really taking the time to re-examine policies and practices to ensure fair access and outcomes for all people. So this conversation is no longer about DEI simply being the nice thing to do or the right thing to do, or how many heads you can count, how many women, how many people of color, and so forth. It's no longer about that. It's a critical business imperative that impacts the talent within and those who we plan to recruit. It impacts the workplace culture, the employee experience. It impacts our engagement with clients, and it ultimately impacts brand equity. So this is very different from diversity practice of yesteryear. 30 years ago when I started, it was called affirmative action, which was totally different. And so we have evolved, and the work has evolved in a very positive way, in my opinion. So we've gone from DEI being defined in the moment to a real movement in most organizations. And so from where I sit, it's a great time to lead diversity practice.
Thanks, Michelle. It's great to have you on here. And I love that thinking around moving from a moment to a movement. Julie, I'd love to come to you next. A huge welcome. And please, if you will, introduce Brown & Brown for those that don't know about it. We've worked with Brown & Brown and the founders for a couple of years now. And you were named a great place to work, certified company in 2019 as well. I know you're at a different stage in this movement and journey, but it's great to have you on this session.
Thank you so much. And Michelle, I wanted to share with you, you're an industry vet. So to me, that's really inspiring because I've been in the Chief People Officer role for 1 year. So certainly have a lot to learn. Started last year, but have been with Brown & Brown for 9 years and was running some of their businesses. So I was running a couple of profit centers. So more of an operational type of individual. So I think one of the things that I love about our company, Brown & Brown, is really that we think about talent maybe differently than some other organizations. And so to have the opportunity to be an operator and running a couple of profit centers and then being put in the Chief People Officer role, I think just represents the difference in our organization and how we think about talent and how we think about difference in backgrounds and difference in thinking. So for me, diversity, inclusion, and belonging was really one of the first commitments. I don't even want to call it a program because it feels like such a commitment to me that I had the honor of working on for the organization. That, and of course, COVID and returning to the workplace. But the diversity, inclusion, and belonging initiative for us at Brown & Brown, we've always valued the diverse backgrounds and experiences of our teammates because we recognize what that brings when we go to make decisions and how we think about our business. But one of the things I think that we had an opportunity to do in 2020, based on all the things that Michelle said so beautifully, is really, we have this opportunity to be far more deliberate than we've been in the past and to really listen to our teammates. If I were to sort of say, what was the theme of DIB at Brown & Brown in 2020, carrying over to 2021, it's about listening. It's about listening to our teammates and understanding what matters to them. How do they want to feel included? What does belonging mean to them? And how could we as leaders really embrace that feeling? And how do we bring that to life in a way that's not us making the decision, but our teammates really being able to build this from the ground up and more of a grassroots and real authentic to our company and to our teammates. So that's for us really what 2020 looked like. And that's gave us really this really, I think, beautiful platform in which we had this opportunity to just do it differently and to really do it in a way that honors our teammates and the diversity that we have. And I would say the other thing that 2020 did for us when I think about diversity, inclusion, and belonging is really just tell the truth. Like just be honest about where we are as a company. So just declare that as a starting point. It's not the end game, but it's just a starting point. And so to have a platform in which we could just declare that as well. So we had an understanding and an agreement of where we were standing. So.
Thank you, Julie. And that theme and topic of listening has kind of been throughout the day. And I also want to come back to something that Ronan Dunn, the CEO at Verizon Consumers, that shared at the start of the day around how corporations are thinking about DE&I, and actually the more you integrate it into an inclusive culture and it's part of the strategy and it's part of the way of thinking and the culture of the organization, the more that is going to take hold, as opposed to it being an initiative on the side run through your functions, which I think, whilst you're all at different stages across different businesses and across different industries, I see that as a common theme across all of your corporations. Sandra, I want to say hi to you as well, and you're Chief Diversity and Talent Strategy Officer at Shearman and Sterling, an international law firm. Share with us, if you will, just a brief background on you and how you came into this, but also how you've seen the DE&I efforts shift in the wake of 2020.
Sure. Hello. And I absolutely agree with everything that Michelle and Julie has already shared with us. So by way of background, as Juliet mentioned, I'm currently serving at Shearman Sterling as their Chief Diversity and Talent Strategy Officer. And Juliet, I loved your point about integration. So I've been in the legal industry now since 1997. I have a really good dermatologist. And I have always believed that even if you don't have diversity in your title, to create a diverse team, to have the best results, and to foster an inclusive environment is the responsibility of every single person in an organization. I believe that that every single person should be held accountable for taking real action in making positive change in diversity, equity, and inclusion space, and that it should not be a standalone. I think one of the reasons why the rate of progress has been so painfully slow in the legal industry is because for too long, D&I was sort of off on the side. And it wasn't part and parcel of other processes aligned with the firm's business or involved collaborations with clients. And so even though diversity, equity, or inclusion was not a part of my official title in an organization until fairly recently, it's always the lens through which I viewed processes that involved recruitment, retaining, developing, or advancing talent within the legal industry. In 2020, I think the real change that I saw move most significantly is the level of engagement just skyrocketed. In some ways, it was a bit of a gift. At Shearman, we've been working on a three-pronged strategy when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's to be data-driven, collaborate with clients, and make sure that all of our efforts are aligned with the firm's business strategy. And things were going along, we were collecting our data, we were measuring, but I was waiting for, frankly, a match to be lit. And I think the unfortunate, tragic, all the circumstances in 2020 was that match that lit a fire under people's butts, and suddenly the engagement just went up through the roof. And it's the collaboration piece. For the first time in a really long time, I'm seeing competitors come together to talk very openly about what has not been working and what has been working. I've also seen more and more excitement and real energy around, hey, let's not just put on a talking heads program with our clients. Let's really delve into running a pilot about getting different people into the mix, having our younger associates, for example, or interns having direct contact with our clients. So things that are just, frankly, were sort of piecemeal in the past, but happening more and more now, again, because of this greater sense of energy and urgency to try new things. And so the collaboration piece for me in 2020 was super exciting and really lovely to see.
And I mean, you shared some great thoughts there, Sandra. Before we get into how organizations can what steps they can take to walk the walk when it comes to DE&I, Michelle, how has BlackRock integrated it into the working practices, and what are some of the things that you have implemented to hold people accountable to make sure it drives sustainable change when it comes to progress for equity and inclusion?
Mm-hmm. Well, we've just unveiled our revitalized global DEI strategy 2 weeks ago. And we've been socializing the strategy over the past couple of weeks. And so our strategy is anchored in 3 core pillars: talent and culture, fiduciary to clients, and social impact in underserved communities. So the work that I'm embarking on, this is not your typical chief diversity officer role that's squarely focused on just human capital initiatives. This is at the intersection of human capital and the business. And we're making sure that it's almost like a Venn diagram, that we meet in the middle. And so when I talk about this, I talk about our strategy from a very commercial perspective, because for us, we see it as an enabler for us to not only position ourselves as best in class in this space, but we also are leveraging these conversations with our clients that will hopefully, that will deepen these relationships and hopefully generate more revenue over time. So we see it as a critical business enabler. So we are doubling down in terms of all of our efforts around talent and culture, looking at all processes around talent acquisition and talent management. In terms of, I think most organizations, the easy part is getting the talent to come into your doors. The difficult part that I think most organizations wrestle with is the retention of the talent, especially with millennials and Generation Y and Z, who don't have the patience to stick around very long. So the question then becomes, what are some of the kinds of things that we need to do in order to entice every single individual, despite your diversity, to want to come and want to stay and work for us for the long term. So the talent and culture piece is incredibly important for us. And also doubling down on the employee experience and making sure that everyone feels like they are part of the whole. And when we treat each other with dignity and mutual respect and all those kinds of things. Around the fiduciary to clients piece, that's really where the rubber meets the road in my perspective. That's where the diversity business case really comes to life. So there's a lot of work that we're doing in terms of creating very specific and targeted products that are going to target specific demographic communities and so forth. And so there's a lot of work and emphasis in that space. And then the last, but certainly not least, around our social impact is really around the work of our foundation and sustainability group, and focusing on the S in ESG. So there's just a lot of areas that we touch. So we see this not only as just human capital efforts, but we see this as a holistic, comprehensive, multi-year, multi-pronged strategy that's really going to position us as best in class over time, not overnight.
And presumably, Michelle, this is part of the board agenda,
Absolutely.
Not separate.
Absolutely. We update the board several times a year. As a matter of fact, that's next week. And so, they're asking the question, so what are we doing from a diversity perspective? And it's not just human capital, just across the board, across the spectrum. What are we doing to advance diversity in all of its forms within the organization?
And Julie, at Brown & Brown, what steps are you taking in this? And what advice would you give to other organizations that are starting out on this journey in terms of how they can walk the walk?
Yeah, I think that one of the first things that we did, in addition, we did a teammate survey. I can't underestimate the importance or overestimate the importance of that enough. We had teammates who wrote a lot of information. They maxed out the characters in the survey, right? There's 3,000 characters and over half of the comments, and we had thousands of them maxed out the characters. So we got so much amazing information, and we read every one of those comments, which I think when you make a commitment to ask for information, it's your responsibility to make sure that you're really reading through that. I think also externally, companies love to share, especially when we're in this together, right? And so we reached out and really connected with other companies to ask what they were doing, to understand what were their lessons learned, so that when because 2020 was the year we got to be really deliberate about this. We wanted to make up a lot of ground. And so didn't want to, spend time cycling on mistakes if we didn't have to. I mean, I don't mind making them, but just felt like there were a lot of companies who had done this really well. So we learned the things that probably we just needed to stay away from, and really were able to focus. So the ways we're connecting it is really through we're putting in a new HIRS system, which is a beautiful time to connect diversity and how we think about the business through capturing data and understanding what we've got going on through equity and pay, through pay scales, all of that. So that timing for us is extremely beautiful. We're connecting it really through how we're talking about talent. So Michelle said that, so I won't go back through that, but we're doing it that way. We're kicking off, which I think probably both Sandra and Michelle have done before, but we are kicking off our TRGs this year, so our teammate resource groups, and we are connecting those teams to the businesses and the communities that both we serve and that we want to serve with our products and services. So those are some of the ways that we're really connecting it, and we're holding ourselves accountable to our board and our teammates alike. So we're going back to our teammates and saying, we've made these promises to you, and here's where we are with those promises. So those are some of the ways.
That's great. And Angela was commenting on your point about just telling the truth about the stage in which you're at and how powerful that is in terms of listening to connect, which is totally different than listening to criticize or judge or correct or respond or defer. Yes. Sandra, actions and what you're doing, but what other organizations could do to walk the walk when it comes to DEI.
Yeah, I love the idea of not relying on gut check, but rather collecting some data. It goes to the truth point, it goes to the accountability point, it goes to measuring your progress and also seeing where there's more work to be done. Now, the data collection and sort of getting that baseline, if you will, is actually quite a bit of work. And it takes some time, but you can't measure where you want to. First of all, you can't set a goal for where you want to go if you don't know where you're starting off with. And so I would strongly encourage companies to consider doing that. And again, it goes to the truth of, where are you at right now in terms of how your people are feeling about the inclusive environment or lack thereof at their workplace? How do your clients think about the efforts that you're making in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space? And then once you take a look at your data, really asking yourself, where do we want to go from here? And how do we measure and track our progress? So I'm seeing more and more companies making the investment to collect that data and not just rely on gut feel or what they think. And that also helps them hold themselves accountable to various stakeholders.
And there's a question on here about what actions have you seen other companies take that are working? Michelle, I see BlackRock as certainly in the financial space, a leader and a progressive leader in this space. But what other companies are you seeing, and how do you get the input to drive sustainable change, and where are the ideas coming from?
Well, to answer your question, there are three things that I typically look for in my conversations with senior leaders, CEOs, and other leaders when it comes to this work. I look for the courage to act, the commitment to lead, and the conviction to change. And if any of those things are missing from the conversations that we're having, I tend to look the other way, because I've seen this movie before where there are companies that will oversell their diversity efforts and they have yet to really demonstrate the commitment. And so that's the first side of it. I think that in terms of actions that I've seen working well, it's really those companies that have taken this holistic view that I mentioned earlier about, it's about people, talent, culture, marketplace, and clients. So if you can somehow interweave all of those things, all of those elements into your strategy, that's how you're going to really move the dial. That's really where the rubber meets the road. And I think that that will allow companies to be a lot more innovative and productive, and some other things where, if you get it right, you'll have a happier workforce, and all of those other things will fall into place.
Yeah. And every stake, you know, there's such a circle of connection with each of the stakeholder groups that you're serving.
Exactly.
Julie, where do you look to? What companies do you take from and see that are doing this well, and how does that apply to your approach at Brown and Brown?
Yeah, so some companies that we've looked at that we're really inspired by is Southwest Airlines, Salesforce. We think that they've done a really nice job. We like some of the work that Travelers has done. We think it's just really important. I think Southwest has one of my favorite taglines. It just gives me the goosebumps, so I'm just going to quote it, but it's not mine. I'm sorry, it's Southwest Airlines. I'm not different from you. I'm different like you. And so that's just so beautiful because it brings it all right. It just puts it right there, right? For me anyway. And so we really want to be inspired by companies who are, you know, on the edge as opposed to companies who really are competitors. We have this momentum now. We have a real deep commitment. This, to me, I want this work to be a legacy to the organization, not a program. And so when we think about companies who are really doing this in such a beautiful, magical way, we think much bigger, right, than our current program, so that we're inspired by something and can just kind of keep moving down a continuum that has us really excited, and that we can show our teammates and they can see where we're headed to. Because, you know, really part of our program is understanding the whole teammate, not just the work teammate. And so we've seen that in some other companies, and that resonates with us. For us, we're so authentic as an organization that just feels like the right way. So if I were to say the one thing that inspires me the most about the programs we've seen is the ability to do that, to understand the whole teammate, not just the work teammate. With that comes compassion and understanding and stories and listening and just really connecting. So yeah, so for me, that's kind of what we've seen and what resonates with us.
I love that. There's a question here from Erica Newman. Considering this new change in view regarding DE&I, how do we get organizations to take a hard look at not only diversity, but having accountability for the inclusion, growth and development, as well as how do we get pay equity to the forefront of this conversation? There's a lot in that. Sandra, do you want to go first?
Sure, I'm happy to. I mean, great question, very complicated. Here's what I would say. I think, you know, two things. One is, Michelle mentioned this already, tying it into the business case. You know, it's not just the right thing to do. You have to show people how this impacts your business. And sometimes you have to spell it out, but, you know, to tie it into the bottom line is very key. I think the second aspect to all of this is we're talking about shifts in behavior. People know they can make different choices. How do you influence their behavior, shift their behavior if they're not, you know, making the right, quote unquote, decisions on their own? Sometimes I do think it is about carrots and sticks and aligning it with, you know, whether it's compensation or otherwise. And not every organization is able to do that. But I think we do have to look very carefully at how do you impact people's choices and, you know, better educate them on how to make the right choices. That's really hard work to do. I think to sustain all of that, it's again, you know, measuring your progress, but also doing the work very intentionally, one day at a time, because it's going to take time for us to see more positive change.
Michelle, any additions to that?
No, I think everything's been discussed, but I really would like to re-emphasize this notion of accountability for all people managers, not just the CEO, not just his or her direct reports, but every single individual needs to have some skin in the game in order for this to work. And also aligning every facet of the work to performance reviews and the compensation process. That also sends a very clear signal to the organization that we're very serious about it and we're principled around it. And it's part of the values of the organization. So yeah, I'd end on that note.
And final question for all of you, because a lot of this is about we're all individually taking responsibility or accountability in different ways, but what actions do leaders need to start taking to scale progress? How do we scale this activity? Sandra, do you want to go first?
Sure. When you were talking through the question just now, Juliet, the three words that popped into my head was show and share. I love it when leaders model the behavior that we want to see in everyone else, and it's contagious. Sometimes it does take courage. Sometimes you are the first one as the leader to call out bias or, call out some form of behavior that, there was a better choice to exercise on. But I think if leaders do that more and really model what we want to see happening throughout the organization, that's really showing people what to do, and then sharing it with everyone and anyone, including your competitors, because I believe so strongly that we have to work together to solve this faster, so to speak. Otherwise, it's going to take too long. So please show and share. That's what I would say. Thank you.
Michelle, for you?
I'd say regular and consistent communication around it. Not just, once a year at a town hall, but regular communications. And that will also demonstrate to the workforce that the criticality and the importance of it. So I think that will go a long way. Town halls, board meetings, employee forums, any opportunity you have to talk about it and the different facets of it and how it's going to make the organization bigger and better and bolder and faster over time. I think that's the key.
I agree. And Julie?
I would say be sure to embed it in the business, and everything that you do in the business. Don't let it stand separate. It doesn't need to. It needs to be embedded in all decisions, in all processes, in all programs, in all strategies. I think that's just critical. And I would say too, don't forget, the listening piece is so important. And I know companies they get large, and I think sometimes the first thing that they forget about or maybe leave behind as they become so large is listening to your teammates, your constituents, understanding what matters to them. And maybe that's not scalable, but maybe that's not intended to be. Maybe there's a reason that that's not necessarily scalable. And really, I think just making sure that anything that you do when you're embedding in the business, it feels like it belongs to you and your company, and you can see yourselves reflected in it, because then it has staying power.
Julie, Michelle, and Sandra, thank you so much. That went way too quickly, but I just want to say thank you again for sharing your expertise and such important and actionable takeaways from this session. It was so valuable, and I can see some of the chatter coming on now of people taking those things away. So thank you, and I look forward to connecting with you all again soon.